Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 436, featuring Hanno Basse, who is the current CTO of Digital Domain, a really amazing guy, has an incredible career, really has been part of the media and entertainment technology front for a very long time. During his time at HBO, he was one of the people that sort of led the effort to an HDR standard, which we can now see on our TVs. And thank you very much, because I think HDR is such a great benefit to the experiences that I'm seeing on television. So really love the fact that he was able to lead some of that effort there. He was also part of Microsoft Azure for a while. We talked a lot about cloud stuff, and now currently at Digital Domain, as I mentioned. So we talk a lot about what's going on at DD, and especially with digital humans. And as you know, they've been involved in digital humans for a long time, and sort of talked about some of the ideas going on there. Obviously, there's a lot of AI tools that they've been using in that realm for a while, and we talk a lot about that, as well as understanding how to overcome some of the controversies, or what some of those controversies are around AI tools, and goes through that process of discussing that. We go a lot into real time, a subject that I am very excited about, as you guys know. So that was really cool to be able to have that discussion with him as well. Okay, we do have a couple of good announcements. There's a lot of actually product stuff that's been announced in the last few weeks, so I want to make sure to recap some of those. First of all, Phoenix 5 Update 2 has been out, so go check that out. And V-Ray 6 for Houdini Update 1 has been out. And something that I'm very excited about, Vantage 2 is out. I'm not actually going to talk about the features in that. In fact, Vantage 2, next week, I will be talking to Simeon about that, because we will just do a whole episode about Vantage 2, a product that I am super excited about. So make sure and tune in next week to find out a little more what's going on with Vantage and all the special things that we are excited about. I do also want to announce one more thing. We do have a special going on right now for cloud credits, and this is going on through August 16th. So if you'd like to check this out, just go to chaos.com, and there's an offer at the top of the page. It will give you our special prices that we have for Chaos Cloud. So go ahead and check that out. And remember, those will end on August 16th. There's a couple of events that I am going to be going to, which I'd love to see you at. I will be at SIGGRAPH LA, as a lot of people will be, and I'm very excited because it is SIGGRAPH's 50th anniversary. So if you're going to be in LA, August 6th through 10th at SIGGRAPH, make sure and let us know. We would love to see you, and if you talk about other things as well. I'm also going to be going to the Rainbow Conference, which is part of SIGGRAPH, but that's going to be in London, August 29th through the 31st, and I'm actually going to give a talk on the 31st, and I'm very excited about that as well. So if you're going to be in London and part of the Rainbow Conference, go check that out as well. Okay, now, if people want to know more about the podcast, of course, you can always just go to our podcast page, which is chaos.com/CG Garage. We also have a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast. And of course, you can always watch us, and that is going to be at youtube.com/Chaos Group TV, where we host all our videos, including the podcast, which is a lot of fun. And if you have ideas of other podcasts you'd like to hear, or comments about anything, always email us. I'd love to hear your suggestions. We've been getting some great ones recently, so please keep them coming. It's labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 436 with Hanno Basse.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Hanno, thank you so much for being on. There's a lot to discuss in terms of technology, visual effects, and where everything is going today. And I think you're the perfect person to answer some of these questions. But before we do that, let's sort of give people a little insight as to yourself and how you got involved and how you've become a CTO and your interest in technology. Where did all this come from?
Yeah, so I've actually been in the entertainment industry for a long time. I'm originally from Germany, and I moved to here to Los Angeles in 1997 to work for a company called DirecTV. So, and I came from television in Germany, and so worked there for a while, and then I became the CTO at 20th Century Fox in 2012. So, because
Yeah.
there's this old saying, what's the point of living in LA if you're not in the movie business? And so I figured I'd do that, and so I was the CTO at 20th Century Fox for 7 years, so which was really
What was your
good.
responsibilities at 20th Century Fox? I mean, as a CTO, what were some of the things you were looking at?
Yeah, so I was mostly focusing actually on product innovation on the home entertainment side, as well as theatrical distribution and production.
Okay.
So on home entertainment, for example, we worked on high dynamic range standards for televisions and for distribution of movies that way. So I think I'm proud to say that I'm part of, the group that actually made high dynamic range happen in people's homes, and is now being used, especially by the streamers, Netflix and Amazon Prime, for example. And HBO actually to a large degree as well, distribute a lot of stuff in the home in HDR. Same thing for theatrical distribution. So worked a lot on that. Also, again, high dynamic range in the theater, but a number of other things there as well, security related. And then content protection, content security was a big part of my portfolio there as well. But the last, I'd say, 3, 4 years, I spent a lot of time on production elements, especially next generation visual effects, and also how visual effects, traditional digital visual effects, how they're being impacted by real-time technology, game engines, Unreal, Unity.
So you must have been involved during some of the Avatar production at that point, right? And on 20th Century Fox.
So I joined shortly after the first Avatar was released. I
Right.
joined in 2012, and I was somewhat, a little bit, not much, a little bit involved in the pre-production of the new avatars, but then Disney took over in
Sure.
2019, so that's 4 years ago. And so when they started going into production big time, I wasn't there anymore.
But were you into? I mean, did you have some time in terms of virtual production, in terms of some of the things that were going on there as well?
Yeah. So clearly there were two parts of producing Avatar, or actually several parts, but the two main parts in terms of live action capture, they first spend, I want to say, a year and a half here in Los Angeles
Hmm.
to do all the motion capture and performance capture.
Right.
So all the Navi, and creatures and all that, that was all shot here in LA.
Hmm.
And then they were adding the live action component, where actually you see real people acting.
Right.
That was all done in New Zealand. So they had started the motion capture while we were still all there at Fox, but then when they went to New Zealand, that was during COVID. I wasn't involved in that anymore.
Sure. Yeah, I know. I'm curious. I mean, I know that 20th Century Fox, not just Avatar, but 20th Century Fox, just before the acquisition, was very, very, as you were mentioning, extremely interested in real time technology and virtual production. I think Glenn
Yeah.
Derry's group was involved in
Oh
there
yeah,
as.
we worked with him a lot. Yeah, and really what we were trying to do there, actually, from a studio technology perspective, was to figure out how does this convergence actually happen between traditional visual effects and real-time game engine technology. Because for a number of reasons, but one of the things that we were looking at the time was, uh, how can you economically create, more of a transmedia experience? So you have
Mhm.
an example like Avatar. People see this world, Pandora, and it's great, and it's really interesting. And how can we actually figure out ways to have people, experience this world and explore this world on their own, even after the movie is long done. And so that was part of what we were trying to figure out. And actually, we were working with Glenn on a movie called The Call of the Wild,
Yeah.
with Harrison Ford, and there, they created a lot of visual effects creatures, all the dogs, the environments, and they had like a whole environment of the Yukon Valley, actually, several kilometers, square kilometers of it, all in the game engine, all in Unreal, and we were trying to figure out, okay, can you take this and turn it into an immersive experience, that lives on beyond beyond the movie. And we did similar work on the Planet of the Apes franchise, where we worked with Weta Digital in New Zealand to take characters from Planet of the Apes and migrate them into an Unreal experience. And we actually did pretty well. We had a very believable version of Caesar in Unreal at some point, and that actually opened my interest in visual effects in more general. And actually, it's a big reason why I'm here now at Digital Domain, because I think in terms of production technology and the evolution of production technology, visual effects is where it's at.
Right.
It's AI. I'm sure we're going to talk about all this in a
Oh
minute.
yeah.
AI technology having a huge impact here. Real-time technology, virtual production, and on it goes. And actually, the one thing that interests me here is we're in the visualization business here at Digital Domain, right? That's what we know how to do. And I think longer term, there is probably even a ton of non-entertainment applications for this types of technology. Simulations, virtual humans, and all that.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure, for sure. And I want to get into all of that, which will be
Mhm.
a potpourri of technology that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm very interested in that. But let's continue with your history, and we can jump around with some of these different ideas. So you didn't go from Fox to Digital Domain. You had another stop along the way, right?
Yeah, I worked for Microsoft on the Azure team, which is their cloud platform.
Yep.
And we were trying to figure out how to build a media and entertainment practice
Right.
on Azure. Um, and so that was actually really interesting for me as well, because learned a lot about cloud technology and what it is and what it isn't, and where it's really applicable, in our industry, and where there's a little bit more myth than truth.
Right.
But I think actually the takeaway from that was there is actually plenty of applicability of cloud technology in our business. It's just it's never black and white with any technology that we're applying. In our trade, people often think, oh, this is it. This is going to change everything, and we're only going to do it this way now. Like with virtual production, for example, in the future, everything is going to be shot in front of LED walls.
Sure.
But in reality, that's never the case. It's always just another tool in the toolbox, and there are certain things where this tool works really well, and there's other things where the old tools are actually still better, so
Yeah.
or more applicable. And I think that was the same with cloud technology. Rendering in the cloud, that makes a ton of sense.
Sure.
Because you don't constantly have to refresh your vendor infrastructure, right? You just take the latest and greatest that's in the cloud. Today you use this, this SKU, which is called shelf keeping unit. It's a retail term. It's
Yep.
like this particular virtual machine and this particular platform, and then 2 weeks from now they have a new one. Okay, you just switch over to that. That's
Yeah.
it's very straightforward. Whereas, if you do this on-prem, then, you're always looking at the capital outlay
And the
and
maintenance and
everything.
and the cooling and the real estate.
Yeah, and all that, the IT overhead to run it.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I found it fascinating. I mean, the thing, I was sort of, 15 years ago, everyone's looking at cloud platforms and they were thinking about what it's going to do. And it was like, no, it's too expensive. Security's never going to be right. And now
yeah.
it seems that all of those questions have been, answered, and people just use them and ramp up and ramp down as they need, right?
Yeah, and then actually, while I was at 20th Century Fox, we were part of an organization called Movie Labs, which is an R&D organization sponsored by at that time, the six major studios. And they wrote a paper. It's a very famous, in our industry, at least for tech geeks here, the Movie Labs 2030 paper, which was all about the industry migrating to the cloud.
Right.
And I helped write it with a few others. And so there we kind of outlined, okay, what the expectations of the studios were going to be in terms of utilization of the cloud. And also, what our execution around cloud would look like. And I actually would say, so this was published in 2019. I actually think a lot of the things have come to pass that we outlined there.
Okay.
Some of them were kind of forced upon us during the COVID pandemic, where
Sure.
everybody had to work from home and remote access and remote work became a thing. Um, and that clearly those aspects are here to stay. And by the way, I mean, security in the cloud's not an issue. It hasn't been an issue for a very long time. I mean, they support, clients like healthcare and, the
Sure.
banking system, banking and even, Department of Defense, run stuff
Yeah.
in on the Microsoft cloud, for example. And all these things need to be secure. Um,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it was interesting that the transition. What do you think was the biggest transition that allowed them to happen? Obviously, there's misinformation or not enough information about how the cloud works or
mhm.
understanding that in terms of
Yeah,
security, as you were mentioning, as
yeah,
one of them. Obviously, necessity that happened with
yeah,
COVID, right?
yeah.
But what about the actual cost? Like, is there a something where the cost suddenly made more sense for it to work in the cloud?
Yeah, I think and that was one of the really main jobs that I had at Microsoft when I was there, is explain to our studio customers, the concept of this of the total cost of ownership and
Hmm.
really what all goes in there. So if you just look at okay, I'm going to rent this virtual machine here with this so and so many CPU cores and so much RAM and so much this particular GPU and so on and so forth. Uh, Typically, if you just look at it like that in isolation, buying it and using it on-prem is going to be the less expensive option. But then
Sure.
you look into, okay, how many of those do I need? Like, for example, in our case here at Digital Domain, we have a lot of artists that use workstations, right, like that. And but our demand for artists kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. Right now with everything going on in the industry, there's a little bit of an ebb here in terms of how much work we all get to do. And so cloud infrastructure really helps you adapt to this very quickly, so you don't have a lot of unused infrastructure sitting there. And at the
Right.
same time, and we know it's going to pick back up later this year, when that happens, okay, then you just throw a number of your workstations into the cloud, and you're able to react very quickly. And then so you that clearly needs to go into the equation. And then also, the fact that you're not using these workstations 24/7, and sometimes you're only working using them for a week or two or a month or two, that all makes this a lot palatable. And you are also trading capex versus opex, right?
Right.
And especially the visual effects business is not known for its richness in terms of capital. And
Right.
so having the option to trade capex versus opex is actually an interesting one as well, especially when you have to go very quickly, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
And I mean, I know obviously rendering itself is
yeah,
makes a lot of sense to happen in that
yeah,
situation. But our workstations are also starting to happen in that
yeah,
situation
yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very clear. I mean, rendering, that's the prime example because we just recently had a number of deliveries all in parallel, and where our internal or on-prem render farm just wasn't big enough.
Right.
Okay, we actually burst into Azure, no problem.
Right.
And then now that's kind of over with. So okay, so we don't have that expenditure. We're done. We're back on our on-prem farm. It's big enough again now. So for that, I think the cloud is great. And also, if you have to get stuff done very quickly, okay, you just spin up a number of these render nodes in parallel. You can still get like stuff that would take hours on our farm. If we really wanted to, we can get it done in minutes.
Right.
Like you just need to spin up enough nodes in the cloud.
Yeah.
So you have that option as well. And then like with rendering, there's all kinds of things that you can play with in terms of the licenses that you need and so on and so forth. So if you serialize more of your render jobs, but all get done very quickly because you're still using a number of nodes here, you can play with that too and save costs that way. So it's yeah, you just have to really look at it you have to approach it in a pretty wide field of view, like a fairly big picture.
Yeah.
And also the other thing, by the way, with the cloud is that you can't just take whatever you have on-prem and lift and shift it into the cloud. I mean, you can clearly do that and it'll keep you in business, but at the same time, you're not really reaping the benefits of working in the cloud. So you really need to think about how your pipeline needs to be architected so it makes sense in the cloud, and what tools and what services do I use.
Right.
And so
Right. But it sounds like you're still somewhat of a hybrid situation where you have some on-prem and you have the other one as well, right?
Yeah, and I don't believe that that's going to go away. I actually
Right.
think it's going to stay because
Okay.
it's just another tool in the toolbox, and there's certain things
Yep.
where on-prem is actually better.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
So you got to Digital Domain, what is it, last year, 2022
Last
or
year,
something?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So what was that transition like to sort of work in a pure visual effects house at that time?
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, a visual effects company is still a studio,
Yep.
right? I mean, we're kind of work for hire, but at the same thing, it's still a production business. And so I remember uh, like the second day at Digital Domain, we every other Tuesday we have our internal production meeting where we go through all the shows that we're working on, all the shows that we're bidding on. And I
Hmm.
got to say that production meeting felt exactly the same as the post-production meeting that we used to have at Fox on
Right.
Mondays. And so I'm like, oh my God, I'm back home. This is great. So
That's awesome.
yeah. Again, and I like movies and I like the movie business. This is my home. This is where I really um, feel great. That I'm working here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was actually a very easy transition for me. I mean, and what did help me is that we did quite a bit of visual effects related work when I was at Fox.
Sure.
I think that really kind of helped me kind of prepare for this. Obviously, I'm not a visual effects expert by any stretch of the imagination, but we obviously have a very deep bench of those types of people here, and I think I can really help with the technology strategy um, and also with my systems engineering background. I think that's really helping. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, Digital Domain is always, they were always kind of not only
Hmm.
somewhat of a technology forward-looking places, risk takers in technology in a
Yeah.
lot of ways,
Yeah.
but also very much like always tended to do things a little bit outside the norm.
Hmm.
Do you feel that that is still part of the fabric of what Digital Domain is today?
Oh yeah, and I think that's probably true, for all the major, visual effects studios, our friends and competitors at the same time. Uh, we're all trying to constantly push the envelope and, and really help, you know, uh, propel the story forward, right?
Sure.
Things that weren't really feasible or possible 10 years ago, they are now possible. But again, you're doing all of that in the service of the story. I mean, we're very famous for our digital human work
Hmm.
and facial animation, and actually we've been applying machine learning technology here for many years now. That
Yes.
actually started with Thanos for Avengers Infinity War in I want to say 2017, 2018,
Hmm.
in that time frame. So we've been using machine learning for 6, 7 years here
Right.
already, and I think especially now, like we delivered She-Hulk last year, where we had a ton of shots where Tatiana Maslany, representing the character of She-Hulk there, she had to look real. She had to look like a person. Yes, she was very tall and powerful and what have you. But at the end of the day, she was a woman,
Right.
with emotions and and we really wanted to make sure that the performance that Tatiana gave, that we actually really could get this across to the viewers and to the audience in a way that's believable. So she had to look like a real human being, and we had tons and tons of shots here. I think 1,400 shots or so with her in there, and so we used a lot of machine learning technology to really get this across, because otherwise, with this amount of work, we would have never been able to deliver the show with
So
any
where
kind
did the machine
of.
learning apply itself specifically on character
Uh,
stuff?
especially in the facial animation.
Okay.
So basically, so she gave this performance, and she obviously had the helmet camera and the dots on her face and whatever. But in the past, you would basically use that and create a 3D model, and have an army of artists basically putting all this together.
Right.
But now we're actually doing two things. We're using machine learning, which is what we started to do
With Thanos.
with Thanos, to create the 3D model of his head, of his face.
Okay.
But then we would still animate it in the background, right? And stuff like that. And still you have a lot of animators doing a lot of detailed work there, even though it was driven by his performance, but there were still, lots of details that we had to add. But with She-Hulk, because of the sheer number of shots that we needed to deliver, and the realism that we needed to get out of this, we just had to automate this more and more and more.
Right.
And so really reduce the amount of touch-ups that we needed to do.
Yeah.
We, with human animators, and we've been pushing this technology forward in a big way. We actually, after She-Hulk, we actually did work for a game called the Quarry,
Okay.
by Supermassive Games, and there we had like 30 hours of facial capture data.
Wow.
And we actually have pushed this now so far that only a small fraction of of that data actually had to be manually, augmented. We could use
Interesting.
over 90% of the machine learning data as is out of the box without any further rework. And it looks fantastic. I mean,
Right.
it's like if you've seen this game, check it out. It's like the human characters there, they look as close to photoreal as they can in a game engine environment. It's really fantastic work.
Yeah. I mean, working in digital images, I worked in DD back in the day, but I know that the enormous amount of work that,
Everybody I meet said, "Oh yeah, I used to work at TD at some
yeah,
point."
yeah.
Like they were like, "No,
It's a good place to get you to to learn your
yeah,
craft.
yeah,
But I mean there was a huge amount of work that's put in. You get a digital human. The model of the face is only the first step. It was like huge amount of blend shapes and fact shapes and all these different things that were done.
yeah."
But it sounds like now like almost all of that processing is done automatically.
Yeah, so yes, that's true. So, for example, right now we're looking at using AI and machine learning to help with body movements, for example, and
Okay.
automating that and animating that. Um, One thing that we just recently did, and we're using it in shows now, is using machine learning to simulate cloth deformation. So as a
Hmm.
character, as the rig in the digital body moves, the clothing has to move with it.
Sure.
In the past, that's character effects, and a lot of people
Yep.
kind of manually kind of helping with things. But now we were able to apply machine learning to this and really rapidly accelerate that process. And truth be told is that there's limited storytelling value in making a cloth look realistic. It just needs to look realistic. And so it's actually great that we have this technology and we can do that, so our artists actually can focus not on the mechanical part
Right.
of making something look right, but as who is this character? What are they doing? Why are they doing this? What's the
R-
story here? And how do I
Sure.
tell that story? I think that's what we want to enable people and our artists to do.
Yeah, I mean that is very interesting, and obviously you've had some interest in machine learning for a long time,
Yeah.
and you've been thinking about this. Right now, there's a lot of controversy over it, shall we say?
Yeah.
There's certain parts of the industry that does not want machine learning because they feel that's going to take their jobs away or
Mhm.
make they won't need them as much. And
Yeah.
that includes anywhere from writing to concept artists to everything else. I mean, obviously machine learning is not something that you are shy about and you
Yeah.
feel that it serves its need in the industry. How do you feel that there can be some conversation in the entertainment industry at large where machine learning can be seen as beneficial to filmmaking process?
Yeah. So in my opinion, and like I said earlier, I think it's just another tool in the toolbox, and people really need to look at it as a tool in the toolbox.
Sure.
The tool in and of itself doesn't make anything, doesn't do anything. It's still humans using the tool.
Right.
And I think if you focus on that aspect, I think that kind of helps frame the discussion in the right way. And like I said, I think what we're looking at is we really, at the end of the day, I'm trying to help liberate our artists from the mundane, from the boring aspects of their work. I want them to be excited about coming to work every day and doing the cool stuff.
Right.
Taking this particular character and making them, do, crazy things or amazing things. You know, turn, like in She-Hulk, turn this natural, regular, not regular. I mean, she's an amazing woman, but turn her into the superhero character.
Sure.
That's how do you do that? And what does she feel, right? What goes through a person like that when they go through a transformation like this? How do I get that on the screen? How do I tell that story to the audience? I think that's what we want them to focus on, and be emotionally invested in this, and so have less that they have less time or need less time to think about the mechanical aspects of it.
Sure.
How does this physically work?
Right.
And also, I think it'll also allow us to do a lot more work than we're doing today, right? So, for example, we would actually love to do a lot more work with animals, but that is a lot of time and resources to create a library of animals. Okay, if we can leverage machine learning to do that, that's great. Or water simulation, for example.
Sure.
Um, that doesn't to make the water naturalistic. That's not really telling a story, right? The story is how much water is it, how impactful is it, and that sort of thing. But whether the bubbles or the waves kind of moving through this realistically or not, that's all math. That's all procedural. And so, if we can use machine learning to help simulate that, that's great. That's what our artists want, right? Because
Right.
that's not the storytelling part.
Well, with the way that you're aware, I'm sure as much as anyone else, how fast and how much is
Yeah.
happening in the
Yeah.
last 3 or 4 months.
Mhm.
How do you look at what's going on and prioritize? Like, okay, we're going to concentrate on this problem, and then by the time you start that, it might be superseded by something else.
Yeah, and that's obviously that's the $64,000 question, right? Is,
Right.
is is how do you pick the ones um, that make the most sense? And I'm looking at this in two categories. One is, yes, this technology is very promising and very interesting, but
Yep.
there's a number of other people already working on it, like our tool vendors, for example.
Sure.
Whether it's a Foundry or Side Effects or Autodesk or Adobe. I mean, they're all obviously focusing heavily on how do we use machine learning and AI,
As are we at
you know,
Chaos.
in that toolkit, that they all provide. So we're trying to stay on top of that, but in the
Mhm.
sense of, okay, they're already developing it, so we don't have to develop it in-house and
Right.
spend time and resources on that. And then in parallel, then now we're trying to figure out actually, okay, like for example with our facial animation, what are the things that are kind of unique to a place like us, and where we can actually really differentiate from our competition. And so we have several things in the works right now, which I don't want to talk about
Yeah, of course.
in a podcast here at the moment. But there are things that we're working on that we feel really excited about. But to your point, we have to figure out how to fail fast and fail often.
Hmm.
But also we need to have, yeah, and we have a decision process in place actually at DD to really make decisions very rapidly and be able to react very rapidly. I think really the great news is that we have a really good group of experts here. And like I said, we've been working with this technology for many years now. And so we have a good bench of people that really understand it very well and are excited about, working with it. And so they're all really busy
Sure.
right now, working on these things. But like I said, we have some stuff in the works that we're very excited about.
What is some of the hardest things to ramp up a project like that, to do a machine learning? Is it finding the right people, or as you mentioned, or you were just mentioning, or is it, does it just take a huge amount of compute to learn to teach the machines or teach the process, or what is the hardest part of a project like that?
It's kind of a little bit two things. It's one is the human resources, the people
Hmm.
that you have working on this, and especially because right now there's such a gold rush when it comes to generative AI and machine learning technology. So it's hard to find people, and we're doing a lot to try to retain the ones that we have.
Right.
And so that's clearly a part, but also I think working with the industry, we've always have a little bit of this chicken and egg issue, which is uh, well, we're working on this technology, but we really need a client and a show to use it on. But sometimes clients are willing to go on this journey with us, and obviously that's the history of the visual effects industry, that
Hmm.
very often things first get developed for a particular show and then they get utilized again and again.
Right.
um, but there is always a little bit of this chicken and egg issue, is is the technology mature enough to actually, for a show to actually take the risk on it. And
Right.
so that's sometimes something that we're working through. But they are, we just, break it into manageable, you know, chunks, or phases, to say, okay, for this show we're going to do it this far, and this is what we're confident we can do. And if we can get extra credit for a few more things, then great. So
Right.
that's how we're trying to manage that.
Yeah, yeah, and with the ebbs and flows of the industry, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
obviously right now there's been
Mhm.
some slowdown in the studios. Is this
Yeah.
an opportunity to try all kinds of new things and to
Oh
keep?
yeah, yeah. We're
Yeah,
clearly trying to take advantage of
right.
that. But although we are still busy, it's not like we're not busy.
Sure.
And so you always hope that you get a little bit of a lull like this, where you can work on these other things. But we're still really busy and trying to figure out how to compartmentalize it a little bit and manage our time so we can focus on the needs of the day, but also the more forward-looking R&D parts of our business.
Right, right,
I
right.
actually think we're managing that well. So
Well, that's great.
yeah, yeah.
That's really great.
I
I,
think really what it comes down to is you really just to be very, you got to recognize that that's a problem that you need to solve, when you really need to make sure that you're focusing on both. You're focusing on the current needs of your clients, but also that there is room for future innovation in R&D.
right. Are
Yeah.
you seeing trends that studios are looking for in terms of where they want to go with visual effects? Obviously, there's real time. We mentioned that. I'm going to get back to in a second. But are you seeing other trends as well?
But and I worked for a studio. I think the studio doesn't really, at least I never looked at it from a technology standpoint first.
Right.
Where So typically studios don't look at it from a sense of, okay, here's virtual production, what can I do with it? It's
Sure.
more like, I have this problem, which tool do I use to solve this problem? I have
Right.
this storytelling problem, and then you go and then, oh, this particular one actually, yeah, we should shoot this in front of an LED screen, and because for a number of reasons. And so that's, I think, where people are coming from, and that also at the end of the day separates the technologies that get used long term versus technologies that don't.
Right.
At the end of the day, what services the story? I keep saying it. That's at the end of the day, and obviously also what helps us save money. And that's either you reduce your schedule, you reduce your artist hours, you reduce your shooting days. That's clearly always something that studios are looking for. Those are the things that we're looking for as well when we're looking at new technology. I mean, what makes us more competitive? And basically
Sure.
that means is we can do the same amount of work with less people and less time. That's what
Right.
Because our cost, is clearly mostly in the artist hours.
Right.
I mean, technology and infrastructure, all that also drives cost, but not by far not as much as the artist component.
So that is also one of your biggest motivations for machine learning is to reduce your artist errors, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, automating things
Sure.
and having, but then if you look at the history of visual effects, though, is in the beginning you had only a few shots of visual effects, and then a few shots of digital visual effects, and then you got more and more and more. Even if you even look at like something like Jurassic Park, I mean,
Hmm.
there obviously were a lot of visual effect shots in there, but not as much as you have now, where some modern contemporary motion pictures, every shot has some form of a visual effect in it, and that was
Right.
clearly not the case with something like Jurassic Park in when was that 1992, where they used a lot of practical effects and props and animatronics and that sort of thing to get that story across. And so that's clearly what we're going to keep seeing is that, this new technology is just going to help enhance the story even more and more. And things will look more realistic. Sometimes, with some movies you can actually see that they can went a little bit overboard with the visual effects, and then sometimes ran out of time or ran out of resources and couldn't really finish it the way that they wanted to, and you see it on screen when you're sitting there. And so um, uh, and that's why I think this technology actually allows us to manage our schedules better and deliver on time and on budget and deliver to the quality that the client expects.
Right.
So I think that's really where machine learning comes from. I think it doesn't necessarily end up using, the amount of artist hours that we actually utilize. It'll just enable them to do more and do a higher quality job, I think,
Right.
than we did before.
Well, it's the same. It's the same thing we always used to joke about in visual effects back in the day. It's like render times never go down because you just keep adding more stuff to it.
Exactly right. And you add more characters, you add more
Right.
background, you add
Yeah.
more environments, right? You add more props and more effects on the props and everything. And so that's typically what ends up happening.
That's actually called Blind's law. It's like Moore's law, but Blind's law. It's a reverse Moore's law.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And actually,
uh,
I can tell you when I was in digital television, it was the same thing with bandwidth. You provide more bandwidth, they figure out a way to fill it
right. Oh,
immediately.
great. Now 4K. Now
More,
HDR.
more channels, high def, and then 4K HDR, what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always the same. You provide capacity, the capacity gets filled. Yeah.
Well, if you were one of the key people that pushed for HDR on televisions, then I'm going to thank you profusely because I think it adds way more value to television than anything else that's out
Oh
there.
yeah. I mean that's the reason why, because at the time, television manufacturers would come to us and ask us to support 4K, and we were like saying, well, the additional resolution doesn't really
We're
help all
8K
that
now.
much. Yeah, so because if you look at the actually transition from standard def to high definition television, which I, was a part of when I was at DirecTV,
Right.
a large part of this wasn't actually the resolution, but the widescreen aspect ratio. You
Right.
watch, a game in that wider aspect ratio actually, covers more of the field and makes it more immersive for you.
Right.
And so high resolution is only part of the story, and it's never the only part of the story. And so that's why then we went back to the TV manufacturers, and for Fox that started with Samsung, but then we created the UHD Alliance where all the major studios were part of it, and besides Samsung, LG, Panasonic, and Sony became a part. And then we said to really create a richer experience for the audience, we have to add high dynamic range, and we
Right.
have to add Dolby Atmos sound and that sort of thing. And so we got all that done. Actually, really happy with that.
Yeah. I mean, I love the fact that I can look at my images now and the brights are bright, but the shadows are detailed. So it's
Yeah,
just, it's,
exactly. I mean, like the detail in the sky, for example, very
yeah.
often that's totally blown out, and now
Yep.
you can actually really have detail
Yeah.
in things like sky. Yeah.
Really, really great.
Yeah.
I want to get back to, sort of adding more stuff on the screen and all those problems because
Mhm.
I was sort of, when I was in the visual effects industry back in the day, I remember that transition where they were moving away from rasterized rendering into ray tracing.
Mm-hmm.
And there were several problems that were being solved through that process. One is that ray tracing eventually was able to include a whole lot more geometry, so you didn't need to optimize things for geometry, etc. You also didn't have to write enormous amount of shaders to fake all the different effects that were done naturally from ray tracing. And we went through that process, and it was sort of around between 2006 to 2009 where I started to see almost every visual effects studio making that transition. So today now we're going sort of into the real-time aspect that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And I want to figure out what it is. But that problem is back again. Like we're rendering shadow maps again, and we're doing rasterized rendering, and we're doing faking things to try to make them look right. And so the benefit, obviously, of real time, well, it's real time, so you don't have to wait for the render. But do you think that there's going to be, more demand on terms of the quality of real time? Because, with the old offline rendering, you can still render a whole lot more and make things look a lot better, right?
Yeah. And we are, mostly for the work that we deliver, we still use, offline rendering.
Sure.
So that's, and I'm not sure to what extent that's going to go away, and to what extent that even has to go away. I think in terms of like a traditional visual effects workflow, the benefit of using real time is that you immediately see the result. Right? You don't program a shader and apply it and do all the texturing and what have you, and then you have to send it off to a render farm and then wait for hours for the result to come back and then say, oh my God, I need to change this a little bit and send it back. So you can iterate a lot faster with real-time technology. But that's only part of the story. I think again, really it's it's a tool in the toolbox, and it depends on the application. So it's not a black and white answer that all of a sudden real time is going to take over entirely. Clearly, in previous, there's a lot of application for real time, and again, time is of the essence typically. I mean, very often our turnover time for previous shots is days. Sometimes they want something in a few hours, and the expectation is that you can deliver it. And for that kind of stuff, game engine technology, and it's been around in that particular field for quite a while, is being used quite a bit because you can iterate very, very fast. And sometimes you can actually iterate with the client on a video call with you, and you make the changes on the fly. Actually, even going back to my days at Fox, with the Call of the Wild, because at the time we wanted to create this transmedia environment, and also actually the studio kind of was struggling to figure out whether to make the movie or not. And so what we ended up doing, actually, you meant Glenn Deary earlier, so the Fox VFX lab, which was headed by Glenn at the time, actually did a full previs version of that movie. The entire film, every single shot was previs in Unreal, and we actually saw huge benefits of doing it that way in production design, for example. And so because the process was, so the production designer would go through his normal process with, we had clay and wooden models, we had, physical, characters on these physical rotating turntables and that sort of thing. We had all that, but then we had to put all this into the game engine. And then the production designer would look at, the digital version of this, and then he would say, well, this building needs to be a little bit bigger or to the left, and that window needs to move. And then, the artist would just click, and move it and do the change right there. And so what happened was, after a while, the production design team that we had on that movie, they actually started designing in the engine directly. They figured out that they didn't have to go through all the physical world stuff first. No, you can actually design it right there in the engine. And so, and again, you can iterate faster. I think that's the benefit. But in terms of actual creating final pixel out of game engine technology, I think so for a while, I think, depending on the show, like for a high-end show, I think where we're going to see that is in virtual production, first and foremost. So basically something being captured in front of an LED wall, in-camera visual effects. There, I think real-time technology is there today. because most of the time it's background, right? It's a little bit out of
Sure.
focus. It doesn't have to be kind of that as photoreal as you would expect it normally. And for that, I think
I
that
disagree. Let me explain where I'm going
okay,
just a little bit.
all right.
I think that there is definitely room for higher quality lighting that could happen in the background out of focus. And I believe absolutely in real time, but I believe it as a ray trace solution as opposed to a rasterized solution. That's really what it comes down to for me, and that's something that I'm actually working on very directly. So obviously, I'm passionate about it.
Yeah. So, and by the way, I did. Uh, I would have kind of, you know, evolved that thought a little bit further. So
Right.
that's the application for that where we're at today,
Right.
right? But especially as GPU technology keeps improving and gets better, I
Yeah.
think we will get to a point where we will see more and more photoreal results out of game engine technology, and and I think the holy grail for me there, by the way, is going to be, can you create believable digital humans with this technology? That's where it all breaks apart all the time.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
so environments, if you have like a rocky surface or hard surfaces of some sort, even today, that actually is already pretty, believable. But animal and human motion, muscle deformation, but especially, the look and feel, the look depth of the skin,
Yeah.
and how that reflects light, subsurface, refraction and reflections and that sort of thing. That's where I think feel, and also with the animation, especially with the muscle deformation, facial deformations, and so on, that's where we're still falling a little bit short
Right.
today, I think. But at the same time, also machine learning will help,
Hmm.
and it'll be really interesting. And it'll be really interesting where this industry goes and whether actually real time in 3D is where we're going to go, or
Just
especially
real time machine learning.
if you think about this, that's actually something I've been struggling with is, and I think there's going to be application for both.
Right.
If you, for example, want to create an animated show of some sort, um, I think in the near future, over the next couple of years, I think you will be able to get away with just having, a series of storyboards with a script, with a dialogue and everything else. And there's kind of technology even today that kind of shows the first kind of foray into this, where you basically just use that, and then the AI fills in all the in-betweens and
Right.
animates this for you. So there's not even a need to go to 3D anymore. You just have 2D storyboards with a script, and it
Right.
fills in the rest. And all because of the power of machine learning. So that'll be interesting. 2D versus 3D at some point, depending on the type of show, depending on what your application is. I think we're going to see that evolve in interesting ways.
Yeah. I'm saying so. So, sort of getting back to sort of the virtual production, and even AI, and everything we've just discussed
Yeah.
so far. Visual digital domain was a post production place in a lot of ways, but
Hmm.
now it seems that because of all this technology, and you are working with art departments, et cetera, that you're much more involved in the production from all points. Like not just like being part of it. You're not just making final pixels. You're making pre pixels, production pixels, and post pixels, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually, I think that's exciting. That's what's exciting about this technology, or our industry. Actually, is this the production process constantly is evolving
Right.
and getting better. Yeah. So, for example, if you look at virtual production, I think one key aspect for the creative team actually is if you're on set, your actors and your director and your cinematographer, you all kind of see what the end product is going to look like, and very
Right.
often, what you capture there is pretty much good to go. And even if it's not 100% there, it'll be 80-90% there. It's still going to be something
Right.
that's totally relatable to the people that are shooting it on set.
Yeah.
And I think that's really an interesting aspect of it. But it totally turns the production process upside down, right? Like you
Right.
said, I mean, there's a lot of decisions that we would make in post production now actually have to be made before you go on set, and
Do you
that
think that's a
has
good thing?
uh, I think in a number of ways it's a good thing, but it changes how people need to think about it, and
Sure.
it's a transition. Like even studio executives haven't necessarily and creatives haven't necessarily wrapped their heads around it,
Right.
and what the benefits of this are. It used to be, oh, we'll just fix it in post, don't worry about it. And now if you make certain decisions before you shoot it, it's harder to fix it. I mean, you can still fix it in post, but now you've already incurred all this cost in the
Right.
pre-production, and now you still need to incur significant cost to fix it in post. That's a little bit of a concern, I think,
Sure.
for some productions. But again, with good planning and with good execution, you minimize that risk, right? I mean, yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that excites me about real time is that, having worked in visual effects way back in the day, you would sit there and you would show something, and the director's like, well, that's not exactly what I had in mind. Can you do this, do that? And it's like, sure. And then they come back next week, and then you see the next version, and it just took forever,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
no,
if it, and in real time, it's like they're more involved in the actual filmmaking. They feel empowered, and I feel that that it's making them feel like they're part of the process again, because I think for a lot of
yeah.
times visual effects, they felt that they were kind of removed from the process, and that's why they didn't like working in visual effects, because they
Hmm.
weren't part of the filmmaking anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that we weren't part of the filmmaking anymore, but
But
clearly,
back in the day, I mean, I think they are now, right?
yeah, yeah, but clearly, yeah. I mean, we clearly see this now where, um, yeah, where we can actually have more input into the creative process than maybe we used to. I
Yeah.
guess that is true. But again, like with everything else, whether it's real time or virtual production or what have you, it just keep coming back to this that it's just another tool in the toolbox. So we're not all of a sudden going to do everything in real time all of a sudden,
Sure.
or we're not going to do everything in just one engine, for example. There's still going to be a pipeline. There's still going to be modeling tools that maybe come from somewhere else, and we're still going to use simulation tools like Houdini, for example,
Sure.
to create certain aspects of things. And then there's going to be a new tool that's going to do this other thing
Right.
better than everything else. And so yeah, it's all these toys to play with, but
Yeah.
they never really go away. I mean, we even still have shows with with practical sets and with practical props and with practical effects. I mean, that
Right.
still happens, right? I mean, even though, let's say now, for example, putting stuff on fire or having it explode or something, that's typically now a post effect, right? Very
Sure.
rarely do they do this on set anymore because it's just,
Too dangerous.
dangerous and unpredictable, and you're doing it in post, you have full control over what's happening.
Sure, 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 sure. Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, Digital Main has always had a history of working really well with their partners, their technology partners, and I don't think
Hmm.
that those
Yeah,
times have not
yeah.
changed. I know that Chaos has been very happy to be sort of working with you guys for a long time. What is it the thing that's important to you when you're working with a technology partner, be it Epic or Chaos or whoever, Houdini side effects, whatever. What are the things that you look forward to or try to make sure that communication is strong?
Well, it's kind of two things. Either it's something that the client comes to us and needs solved, and again, it's in the service of telling the story. Or, a big part of my job here right now is how can we be more efficient,
Hmm.
right? And yeah, whatever tools are out there to make us more efficient, I'm all for it,
Right, right,
um, because it allows us to do more.
right.
Like again, it wouldn't be a matter of us employing less artists. It would actually be actually two things. How can we scale better and actually employ more artists than we can today? There's some limits that we're hitting sometimes today, but even with that. But then also, yeah, how do we scale? How do we do more? With the group that we have.
Sure.
So I think that's really what we're looking at more than anything else.
Great. Great. Well, as we're coming towards the end, I mean, I know there's only so much you can tell because obviously you have to keep some of the technology developing and under rest. But what are the things you think are going to, like, where do you see the direction? Like 5 years from now, it's so hard to predict with everything that's going on with AI and machine learning. Where do you think 5 years from now, you mentioned like how an animation could be done with just storyboards and a script in some ways.
Yeah.
What other things do you think could possibly be happening in 5 years?
Yeah. I got to say, I'm actually a little worried about, 5 years out. I'm not really sure in terms of, being able to predict it with any type of certainty because, and maybe worried is the wrong word. It's just I'm not certain I could predict something over the next 5 years because things are moving and changing so rapidly.
Right.
But even over the next 2 years, I think we will see generative AI everywhere. In terms of a virtual assistant that can basically help you with anything. Whether that's writing an email or a document, whether that's creating concept art, whether that's creating geometry and animating things and what have you. So all aspects, writing code. I mean, that's already a thing. Writing scripts. So I think it'll permeate our entire workflow from A to Z, and even our administrative part of our work. Finance, accounting, human resources, what have you. I think all these things will be permeated by AI-driven assistance, and I'm very specifically calling it assistance, because I think that's what it is. It's not replacing my job or like an accountant's job. Is assisting them doing a better job and doing a more efficient job. I think that's the way I see it, and it's the same for artists.
I listened to a really interesting podcast with a CTO of Microsoft, and he was talking about how they're insisting on calling them co-pilots for that exact reason, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting as well.
Yeah,
and you see those assistants happening in production as well, like in this kind of way, right?
Yeah. So, for example, for production, I'm pretty sure, and we've seen this already a little bit here and there. There's companies out there that do this, but do a script breakdown, for example. I mean, clearly that seems ripe for the application of machine learning of some sort.
Right.
Just feed it, 1,000 scripts and the breakdowns that already exist for those, and there's got to be a better outcome here.
Yeah, defining all the, you got to plan for this and plan for that. Yeah, that's true. Very true. Well, Hanno, thank you so much. This fascinating conversation, and thanks for being on. I'm very excited about what's your thoughts are on the future of technology in the visual effects industry, and it was great having you on. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Chris. This has been great, and thank you for the great questions and for the dialogue. Actually, that it wasn't just a one-sided conversation. Yeah, I love this. This is great. Thank you.